The phone trembled in the young woman's hands as her voice broke. Behind her, hidden behind the half-open door, a man in elegant clothes held his breath. Marcus Washington, 42 years old, owner of the most luxurious five-star hotel in Atlanta, had pretended to be a regular guest to test his new staff, but what he was about to hear on that call would change everything. The new housekeeper, with yellow gloves still stained with soap, pressed the phone against her ear as tears began to fall. Her next words would reveal a secret so heartbreaking that Marcus would have to make an impossible decision. This is the story of how a deception designed to unmask the dishonest ended up revealing the purest truth a human heart can contain. Marcus Washington had built his empire over 15 years. The Washington Grand Hotel was his creation. 8 floors of luxury in the heart of downtown Atlanta, near Peachtree Street, 250 rooms, 3 Michelin-starred restaurants, a VIP spa. But success had a price: constant paranoia. In recent months, he'd noticed discrepancies in the accounts. Supplies that cost too much, towels disappearing, cash from the register that didn't add up. The director, Jerome Davis, assured him everything was under control, but Marcus no longer trusted anyone. So he decided to pose as a regular guest. No famous name, no special treatment. Just Marcus Johnson, businessman from Chicago. He booked a standard room with fake ID. He wanted to see how his hotel operated when the owner wasn't watching. The first days were revealing. The bartender serving smaller drinks, the restaurant waiter pocketing tips, small dishonesties. But it wasn't enough. He wanted concrete evidence from the housekeeping staff. The housekeepers saw everything. They had access to money left on nightstands, forgotten jewelry. There were 6 housekeepers on the 4th floor. 5 seemed professional, but the 6th was new. Her badge said Keisha Monroe, maybe 28 years old, natural hair pulled back in a neat bun, perfect navy blue uniform. She moved with nervous determination, like someone who desperately needed this job. Marcus decided to focus on her. He left the room messy that morning. $50 on the nightstand, clearly visible. An expensive watch in the bathroom sink. A gold necklace on the bed. Perfect bait. He left but stayed in the hallway hidden. He wanted to see what Keisha would do. After 10 minutes, he saw her arrive with the cleaning cart. She knocked 3 times, no answer. She entered, leaving the door slightly open. Marcus approached silently, positioning himself where he could see without being seen. Keisha made the bed with precise movements. She'd seen the money but didn't touch it. She cleaned the bathroom, moved the watch delicately to clean underneath, put it back in the same position. The necklace she folded carefully and placed on the nightstand. Marcus was about to leave, satisfied, when Keisha's phone vibrated. She pulled it out, looked at the screen, and her face changed completely. The color disappeared. Her eyes filled with fear. She answered with trembling hands, and what Marcus heard changed everything. Keisha's voice when she answered was completely different. Small, broken, desperate. Marcus pressed against the wall, holding his breath. Keisha was talking to the hospital. She said yes, she was the mother of Jaden Monroe, that she'd received the urgent message. As she listened, her legs began to tremble. She leaned against the bed, then sat down as if she couldn't stay standing. With her free hand, she pressed her mouth to muffle a sob. Marcus could only hear her side of the conversation, but it was enough. Something terrible was happening. She kept saying she understood, that she'd come right away, that they should do everything necessary, that money wasn't a problem, though clearly it was. When she hung up, she remained motionless, shoulders shaking. Then she stood up abruptly, wiped her eyes violently, and finished the cleaning frantically. Her movements had become mechanical, while tears fell silently. Marcus didn't know what to do. He'd come to discover thieves, not this. But there was something in Keisha's silent desperation that squeezed his heart. Keisha finished in record time. Everything was perfect. The money exactly where he'd left it. The watch untouched. The necklace safely placed on the nightstand. She hadn't stolen anything. Yet she was in crisis, and Marcus realized he couldn't ignore it. He called Jerome, asked for information on Keisha Monroe. Hired a week ago. Perfect references. Desperately needed the job. Single mother with a son. Fired from her previous job when she asked for too many emergency family leaves. Marcus asked what kind of emergencies. Something about her sick son, but Jerome didn't know details. Marcus sat on the bed that Keisha had made so carefully. He looked at the money. $50. Nothing to him. For Keisha, probably a fortune. Yet she hadn't touched it. He made a decision. He would find out what happened, not as owner, but as a human being. Marcus spent the rest of the day doing discreet investigations. What he discovered crushed his heart. Jaden Monroe was 9 years old. He'd been born with a rare genetic disease affecting his kidneys and immune system. He needed constant care and expensive medications. Keisha had raised him alone after the father disappeared when he discovered the illness. For 8 years, she'd fought to keep him alive, working double shifts, taking out impossible loans, selling everything she owned. A month ago, Jaden had gotten worse. He needed a kidney transplant that cost $95,000. The public system would do it, but the waiting list was 18 months. The doctor said Jaden didn't have 18 months. He had maybe 4 months, 5 with luck. Keisha had desperately tried to get the money. Every bank had rejected her. She was already too deep in debt. Family couldn't help. An online fundraiser had raised $6,000, a drop in the ocean. Then she was fired because she asked for too many leaves for Jaden. No job, no money, with a dying child. The job at the Washington Grand had been a miracle. With each paycheck, she saved every penny. She skipped meals, walked instead of taking the bus, bought second-hand clothes, everything for Jaden. But it would never be enough. Even saving everything for 6 months, she wouldn't reach half the amount. And Jaden didn't have 6 months. Marcus read everything and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He built his empire by hardening his heart, convincing himself that business came first, that emotions were weakness. But looking at the photos of Keisha with the small boy in front of Grady Memorial Hospital, something inside him broke. He saw a mother who'd given up everything, who'd worked until exhaustion, who'd never lost hope even when the world told her to give up. The next day, Marcus called the hospital, pretending to be family. The nurse was firm. Jaden was stable, but time was running out. Maybe 8 weeks before conditions became irreversible. The transplant was necessary immediately, once a matching kidney was found. Marcus asked the exact cost. $95,000. Impossible for a housekeeper. Ridiculous for a millionaire. He couldn't sleep that night. He thought about Keisha cleaning while crying, who hadn't stolen $50. He thought about Jaden, who'd done nothing to deserve that disease. He could pay easily. $95,000 was less than his last art piece for the lobby. But giving the money meant revealing who he was, getting involved, opening a door closed for years. At 3 a.m, he made a decision. He wouldn't give the money directly. He had to find a way that would allow Keisha to maintain her dignity while he did what his heart suddenly told him to do. Marcus spent the following days crafting a plan. It had to be perfect. Keisha couldn't know the money came from him. He spoke with Jerome about organizing a raffle for staff. Prize, $100,000, enough for Jaden's transplant. Jerome thought it was strange, but Marcus was the owner. The problem was making Keisha win without it seeming rigged. He had an idea. A competition based on work performance. The housekeeper with the best guest reviews in 1 month would win. Perfect, because Keisha was good, maybe the best. In the following days, he continued pretending to be a regular guest. He always requested Keisha to clean his room. Each time he left enthusiastic reviews. He also talked to other guests he knew, asking them to request Keisha and leave positive reviews if the work was good. And the work was always good. He watched Keisha from a distance. He saw how she arrived half an hour early, how she stayed an hour late, how she never complained. 1 week later, Keisha was cleaning a suite when the phone rang. Marcus was nearby, pretending to wait for the elevator. It was the hospital. Jaden had had a kidney function crisis. Not critical, but a warning. Time was running out. Keisha tried to stay calm. She said she was doing everything possible. Please keep Jaden stable. She'd come after work. When she hung up, she didn't cry. She looked at the phone with an empty expression. It was the expression of someone who'd fought so hard they had no more tears, only ruthless determination, because giving up meant losing everything. Marcus felt something harden into a decision. He couldn't wait a month. Jaden didn't have a month. He had to act now. He called the best pediatric kidney transplant surgeon in Georgia. He explained the situation without giving names. He asked how much time Jaden really had. The surgeon was brutal. With those symptoms, maybe 5 weeks, 6 at most. The transplant was necessary immediately, assuming a matching donor could be found. 5 weeks. He couldn't wait. He had to act. But how? Without revealing everything, how could he give Keisha the money without destroying her dignity? He spent the night thinking. At dawn, he had a plan. Risky, complicated. It would require partially revealing who he was, but it was the only way to save Jaden and allow Keisha to keep her head high. The next day, Marcus asked Jerome to call Keisha to his office. When Jerome asked why, Marcus simply said to do it without questions. There was something in his voice that made the director not insist. Keisha arrived at the director's office with a terrified expression. She obviously thought she was going to be fired. Her hands were clasped in front of her, knuckles white. When she entered and saw Marcus sitting behind the desk next to Jerome, she seemed even more confused. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he asked Jerome to leave them alone. The director seemed surprised but obeyed, closing the door behind him. Keisha remained standing in front of the desk, trembling. Marcus gestured for her to sit. She sat on the edge of the chair, ready to flee or collapse, it wasn't clear which. Marcus began to speak in a calm voice. He explained that he wasn't Marcus Johnson, guest. He was Marcus Washington, owner of the Washington Grand Hotel. He'd posed as a guest to test the staff, to see how his hotel operated when he wasn't watching. Keisha went even paler. She probably thought she was finished, that everything she'd worked for was collapsing. But Marcus continued. He said he'd observed her work for days. He'd seen her dedication, her honesty, the way she treated each room as if it were the most important. He'd seen that she hadn't stolen the money he'd deliberately left in plain sight. He'd seen an employee who was exactly the kind of person he wanted in his hotel. Keisha listened in silence, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Then Marcus said something that surprised her. He said he'd also overheard, by chance, her call from the hospital. Not intentionally, it had happened while he was testing the staff. But now he knew about Jaden, knew about the transplant, knew time was running out. Keisha began shaking her head, tears now flowing freely. She began to apologize, to say she'd never let her personal problems affect her work, that she'd always been professional, that she'd never ask for leaves or special favors. Marcus raised his hand to stop her. He said she shouldn't apologize for anything. She'd done impeccable work under impossible circumstances. Anyone else would have collapsed. She, instead, had kept showing up, doing her job perfectly, maintaining her dignity even as her world fell apart around her. Then he made the proposal. The hotel had an emergency fund for employees in difficulty. It was little known because it was rarely used, but it existed. Marcus had decided to use that fund to cover the complete cost of Jaden's transplant. It wasn't charity. It was an investment in a valuable employee who demonstrated integrity and dedication. Keisha looked at him in disbelief. She couldn't speak. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Marcus continued. He said there was only one condition. After Jaden recovered and was stable, Keisha would continue working for the hotel for at least 2 years. He wanted her to become housekeeping supervisor, to train new staff, to pass on her work ethic to others. She didn't have to pay back the money. She'd pay it with her time and knowledge. Finally, Keisha found her voice. She asked in a broken voice why he was doing this. He didn't know her. They were strangers. Marcus was honest. He said he'd built his empire putting profits before people. He'd hardened his heart because he thought it was the only way to succeed. But seeing her work with such dedication while her world crumbled, he'd understood something. True value wasn't in the numbers on paper. It was in the people who show up every day and do their best, even when no one's watching. Keisha began to sob. She couldn't believe it was real. Marcus stood up, went to the other side of the desk, and put a hand on her shoulder. He said it was real. Jaden would have his transplant, and she wouldn't have to carry that weight alone anymore. Keisha suddenly stood up and hugged Marcus, sobbing against his expensive shirt. He was surprised for a moment, then slowly returned the embrace. It was strange. He hadn't hugged someone with true emotion in years, but it felt right. When Keisha calmed down enough to speak, She asked when they could schedule the surgery. Marcus said he'd already called the best surgeon in Georgia. They were working on finding a matching donor through the National Registry, and once found, the surgery would be scheduled immediately. Jaden would be transferred to Emory University Hospital, where he'd have the best possible care. All costs covered. Keisha couldn't stop crying and thanking him. Marcus told her to go home, be with Jaden, take all the time she needed. Her job would be waiting when she was ready to return. He watched her leave, still crying, still in disbelief. And for the first time in 15 years of ruthless business, Marcus Washington felt something more valuable than any profit margin. He felt human again. Finding a matching kidney donor took 3 weeks. 3 agonizing weeks where Jaden's condition deteriorated daily. Marcus visited the hospital regularly, not as hotel owner, but as someone who cared. He met Jaden, a bright, sweet boy who'd spent half his life in hospitals, but hadn't lost the ability to smile. When Jaden discovered that Marcus was the kind man who'd helped his mom, he hugged him tight and asked if he could call him Uncle Marcus. Marcus, who'd never wanted family or personal ties, felt something in his chest tighten and open at the same time. He said yes, he could call him Uncle Marcus. Then something extraordinary happened. During routine testing, the transplant coordinator discovered something remarkable. Marcus himself was a match. Not perfect, but close enough. 6 out of 6 antigens matched. The odds were astronomical, especially across racial lines, but there it was in black and white. Marcus Washington could save Jaden's life directly. When the surgeon told him, Marcus didn't hesitate. He said yes immediately. The surgeon warned him about risks, recovery time, the fact that he'd be donating a kidney. Marcus cut him off. He said he understood the risks and was absolutely certain. Schedule the surgery. The surgeon asked if he wanted to tell Keisha first. Marcus said no. She'd try to talk him out of it, feel guilty, refuse to accept it. Better to do it and explain later. The surgery was scheduled for the following week. Marcus told Jerome he'd be out for a medical procedure, said nothing else. He told Keisha that a donor had been found and Jaden's surgery was scheduled. She broke down in tears of relief, thanking God, thanking Marcus, thanking everyone. She had no idea the donor was standing right in front of her. The day of the surgery arrived. It was a complex procedure. 12 hours total. Marcus's kidney was removed laparoscopic, then transplanted into Jaden's small body. The surgical team worked with precision, and when it was over, both surgeries had been successful. The kidney began functioning immediately in Jaden's body. It was, the surgeon said, one of the most perfect transplants he'd seen in 30 years. Marcus woke up in recovery, groggy from anesthesia, in pain but alive. The first person he saw was Keisha, standing by his bed with an expression of shock, gratitude, and something deeper he couldn't quite name. The surgeon had told her the truth. That Marcus had been the donor. That he'd given his own kidney to save her son. Keisha couldn't speak. She just held Marcus's hand and cried. When she finally found words, she said she didn't understand. Why would he do this? Give up part of himself for a child he barely knew? Marcus, still foggy from medication, said something he'd never said before. He said that for 15 years, he'd measured his worth in dollars and assets. He'd thought success meant accumulation, power, control. But lying in that hospital bed, missing a kidney but knowing Jaden would live, he understood what real wealth was. It wasn't what you kept for yourself. It was what you gave away. Jaden's recovery was remarkable. Within days, the new kidney was functioning at full capacity. His color returned. His energy came back. He was, for the first time in his life, truly healthy. Marcus's recovery was slower. Kidney donors need 6 to 8 weeks to fully heal. But every day, watching Jaden get stronger, he felt the pain was worth it. 3 months later, Keisha returned to work, but not as a housekeeper. Marcus kept his promise and promoted her to housekeeping supervisor. Her salary tripled. She had an office, responsibilities, respect. But more importantly, she had hope. For the first time in years, she could look at the future without terror. Jaden was healthy. They were okay. All because of a man who'd posed as a guest to catch thieves and instead found something worth far more than anything that could be stolen. 1 year after the transplant, Marcus invited Keisha and Jaden to his home, not one of the hotel's restaurants, but his private penthouse that few people had seen. He cooked personally, something he hadn't done in years. His mother's recipe for shrimp and grits, the way she taught him before she passed away. After dinner, while Jaden watched cartoons in the living room, Marcus and Keisha sat on the balcony overlooking Atlanta's illuminated skyline. Keisha thanked him again, for the 100th time. Marcus shook his head. He said he was the one who should thank her. She'd reminded him why he'd started all this, why he'd worked so hard to build something. It wasn't for the money or power. It was to make a difference in people's lives. Keisha said something he'd never forget. She said God had sent Marcus disguised as a regular guest because sometimes miracles come camouflaged. You have to look beyond the surface to see them. Marcus laughed, said maybe she was right. He'd posed as someone else to discover the truth about others. But in the process, he discovered a truth about himself. That he didn't have to be just a cold businessman. He could be something more. 3 years after that phone call that changed everything, the Washington Grand Hotel wasn't just the most luxurious in Atlanta. It was also known as the place where employees were treated like family, where people in difficulty found help, not judgment, where Keisha's integrity had become the standard everyone tried to reach. Marcus had expanded the program to other hotels he'd acquired. The Jaden Fund, as he called it privately, though officially it had a more formal name, had helped hundreds of employees across the Southeast. Any employee facing medical or family emergencies could apply. Some paid back the money when they could. Others didn't. Marcus didn't care. He'd learned that some investments pay returns that can't be measured in dollars. Jaden was 12 years old now, completely healthy, and worked part-time at the hotel on weekends. He wanted to understand the business from the inside before going to college. Marcus had told him there would always be a place for him after graduation if he wanted it. The boy who'd been dying was now thriving, talking about becoming a doctor to help other kids like he'd been helped. Keisha had been promoted again. She was now director of operations for all 3 Washington hotels in Georgia, the second highest position after Jerome. She'd also gone back to school, getting her business degree with Marcus paying the tuition. She'd gotten married too, to a physician she met during one of Jaden's follow-up appointments, a good man who loved her and her son. Marcus had walked her down the aisle, proud as a real father would have been. And Marcus had finally understood what family meant. It wasn't just blood. It was choosing to show up for someone day after day. It was seeing someone at their worst moment and deciding to stay. It was posing as someone else and discovering who you really are in the process. The phone on his nightstand had a photo as wallpaper. It wasn't of his hotels or his achievements. It was of him, Keisha, and Jaden at a Braves game, all wearing jerseys, all laughing at something Jaden had said. He looked at that photo every morning when he woke up. It reminded him that the most precious thing he'd found hadn't been in a balance sheet or investment portfolio. It had been behind a half-open door, in a desperate phone call, in the eyes of a mother who'd never given up. Every time he heard an employee crying or struggling, he didn't look away. He approached, asked, helped. Because he'd learned that sometimes you're placed in people's lives at exactly the right moment to be the miracle they need. And sometimes, while you're helping them, they save you too. The Washington Grand had a new mission statement now, one Marcus had written himself. We don't just provide luxury accommodations. We build a family where every person matters, where integrity is rewarded, where no one faces their darkest moments alone. It was displayed in the employee break room, in every office, in the lobby. And every new hire heard the story of Keisha and Jaden, not as a fairy tale, but as a reminder of what the hotel stood for. Marcus still posed as a regular guest occasionally, but not to catch thieves anymore. He did it to see the hotel through customers' eyes, to ensure the culture of care he'd built was maintained. And every time he saw a housekeeper working with dedication, he remembered Keisha with her yellow gloves and broken voice, who'd chosen integrity over desperation. The surgical scar where they'd removed his kidney had faded over the years, but Marcus sometimes traced it with his finger, a reminder of what really mattered. He'd given up a kidney and gained a family. He'd given up his cynicism and gained his humanity back. He'd given up the illusion that money was everything and gained the understanding that everything money can't buy is actually everything worth having. On the 5th anniversary of the transplant, Marcus threw a celebration at the hotel. Not a fancy gala, but a family picnic in the courtyard. All the employees who'd been helped by the Jaden Fund were there, along with their families. Over 200 people, all with stories of how one moment of compassion had changed their trajectories. Jaden, now healthy and strong, gave a speech. He talked about the day he'd been dying, when every breath was a struggle, when the future was a dark impossibility. He talked about his mother who never gave up, who worked herself to exhaustion, who loved him with a fierceness that kept him alive. And he talked about Uncle Marcus, who'd posed as a stranger but revealed himself to be family. When Jaden finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtyard. Marcus stood up, not to give a speech, but to say something simple. He said that 5 years ago, he'd thought he was testing his employees. But they'd actually been testing him. And he'd failed the test he thought he was giving, but passed a test he didn't know he was taking. The test of whether he was still human beneath the success. Whether he still had a heart beneath the armor. Keisha stood beside him, Jaden between them, and Marcus realized this was his real empire. Not the buildings or the bank accounts, but the lives he'd touched, the family he'd built, the person he'd become. He looked at the people gathered, all of them connected by threads of compassion and second chances, and knew this was what success actually looked like. That night, after everyone left, Marcus sat alone in his office. He pulled out the fake ID he'd used 5 years ago. Marcus Johnson, businessman from Chicago. He looked at it for a long moment, then tore it up. He didn't need to pretend to be someone else anymore. He'd finally figured out who Marcus Washington really was. Not just a millionaire or a hotel owner, but a man who'd learned that the best investment you can make is in another human being, and the best return you can receive is knowing you've saved a life and in the process, saved your own soul.